Well, welcome in to the Fat Beans Coffee Lab. I am the Bean Man, and our content is, you guessed it, coffee. So, we're going to be roasting some coffee tonight, quite possibly one or two batches, just kind of what I'm in the mood for, but kind of something special today for today's show because we're going to be doing it on a Behmor 2000. Normally, I roast my coffee on an Allele Bullet R1, but I really got my start as far as making more than about 4 ounces, which I used to do on a popcorn popper, on a machine, not on a machine like on this machine, which is an Allele Bullet, a Behmor 2000. I'll be going over the specifics of it as well as roasting some coffee on it because although the capacity of the Allele, I'm going to do that probably 30 times. Although the capacity of the Behmor is very sparse, definitely compared to commercial roasters, but also to some home roasters out there, um, it does make some really good coffee. It just takes a lot of tweaks. So if you are new to home roasting, this might be one of the first, big roasting purchases that you make because although it's around $450, which, still is a pretty big chunk of change. As far as being able to, really start to roast coffee, have a little bit more control, have it be a little bit more safe, some smoke suppression. It is definitely a step up from, say, a popcorn popper. There are some smaller gadgets out there that do a good job, but this one is kind of the first step, and it's how I got my start in roasting coffee. So I'm gonna walk through some of the specific steps. Right now, I'm just looking for kind of some roast guides, and I'll go through why keeping a roast log like this on a Behmor is really, really important, and kind of talk about some of the Behmor's strengths as well as some of its more defined weaknesses, and ultimately why I decided to move over to the Allele Bullet from the Behmor. But great roaster, roasts great coffees. So that's what we'll be doing on today's episode, I guess. YouTube. Full disclosure, I normally stream. I got my streaming start on Twitch. A lot of my early stuff was on a machine like this. So this isn't my first time going live or, video cameraing this. So I got some cool angles and some cool shots that I can do while we're going along. If you are watching live with us, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I will answer those to the best of my ability. Other than that, just sit back and enjoy the sweet, hypnotic views of the Behmor 2000. But as we always do in the Bean Show, Bean Man needs a little liquid motivation. This is a Sumatran coffee, medium dark. I guess if you needed to have, you're like, give me a specific roast level on it, I would say it's about a full city. That's kind of the roast level I put on it. Somewhere around 50, 55. If you keep track of those numbers, you know what that means. In the color scale. And just doing it on a AeroPress, which is my preferred method of brewing, simple just because of its ease and how it can give a nice balanced cup of coffee with a very small amount of effort and time. It takes about a minute. So, well, I'm letting that roast. So about a journal. When I first started roasting, I was the quintessential artist where I would just plug in the machine, I would put beans in there, I would watch, I would listen, I'd really try, I'd push buttons, I'd try to get a good idea of what was going on. Um, and that worked. I was roasting coffee and it was drinkable coffee, and sometimes it was really good coffee. The issue I started to run into was that I there wasn't a lot of control. And by control, I mean I kind of had an idea of what was going on, but I, there was certain things, variables, different things I was doing that I wasn't quite sure what the effects that they were having. That kind of led me very quickly to journaling everything I do. If you're roasting coffee at all, and really if you're doing any sort of cooking or you're doing anything where you're trying to become a master, uh, you've got to have some way to catalog your efforts. Not because, this is a release and it's good for your soul, which both things are true. More importantly, keeping track of all of your data and your variables kind of not only show you where you've been, but kind of can start to tell you where you're going. For example, I have the first 200 roasts I ever did as a coffee roaster are all, well, not the first. I just told you, my first couple of roasts, I was, jazz singer all over the place. But the first 200 logged roasts on this machine are all right here. And what I can now do is kind of go back, see coffees that I've roasted in the past, and get a good idea of what my strategy was there, match it up with what my strategy is now, and not be going about this blind, where I'm going to be have a good idea of kind of what I want to be doing. Press out the Joe here. Ooh, perfect. Perfect. Cheers. Notice I just took a little sip of that. I just wanted to see if I could taste any of the sugar notes on the coffee before I let it cool down. Now I'm going to let it cool down about 30 degrees Fahrenheit so that it's a little bit more safe for consumption and I can start to draw out some of the good flavors there. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get into the Behmor. And I'll kind of see if I can't angle you guys some camera here just so you can get a good idea of what the Behmor. Like I said, the Behmor, a lot of people get these as their first roasters, and they're super newbie friendly in that anyone can really pop coffee in here and get roasted coffee out of here, but it can get a little bit complex. And in order to really start getting excellent coffee out of this machine, it does take a little bit of finessing. So I'm going to kind of go through all the things that I have learned, like I said, doing 200 roasts on this machine. Um, by no means is this like what you have to do, but I've gotten some really, really consistent and good results from this machine using some of the methods that I'm going to talk about here. So let's dive right into it. I'm gonna move up over here. Okay, so the Behmor. It is again. This is not a toaster oven for hot pockets. It is a coffee roaster. It is a drum-based roaster. So here's the drum. As you can see, it's in this wire basket. There are some tumblers in here. So the coffee is going to tumble around in the drum while it's roasting. There are two agitators, kind of like a rotisserie, that move this, that spin this drum like so. There is a chaff collection tray. It is meant to catch some of the chaff. Full disclosure, it doesn't catch much chaff. The Behmor, if you're going to be roasting coffee on here, just be ready. Have it in a spot that you don't mind getting a lot of coffee chaff. I don't recommend like trying to roast this on your grandma's white furniture. I would say if you're going to use this machine, a lot of people use it outside, and we'll talk about why that is here in a second. But people also tend to use it on top of their stove where they have a vent, but also in an area that they don't mind getting some chaff. The chaff suppression system is pretty good for a small home roaster, but when you start seeing some of the things, some of the tweaks that I'm going to make, you're going to see why chaff becomes an issue relatively quickly on this machine. Okay, so further into the guts here, you can see there are actually two bars. These are just heating elements. You'll notice when we start roasting, these two bars are going to get really red. There is a cage here to try to prevent, well, obviously fingers, I guess, but really too much chaff kind of collecting back here on the heating elements. There's also some reflective metal that does help kind of reflect some of the heat back at the beans. A roasting chamber. You can't see them, and nor am I going to try to really. Let's see. I guess it would help if I turn the light on. Now, full disclosure, it's been a while since I roasted on this, so if it seems like it's taken me a minute to kind of remind myself, it's true. It's been a couple of months, but we're doing it live, so. Anyway, if you look in the machine, there is actually two thermocouples present on the machine. There is one back here. So this is where air is exiting the machine. So the thermocouple is actually calculating information about air that leaves the machine. There is also going to be a couple thermocouples that can be found here on the sides of the machine, and that is going to record how hot it is inside the machine. That is really all the information that you're able to get as far as heat variables from this machine. It's not much, and if you are somebody who's roasted on a bigger machine and you're just kind of interested in this, you'll quickly notice that that should send up red flags about, all right, you actually can't get much data out of this machine. The one biggest flaw, in my opinion, why the Behmor it has some consistency issues is that you can't actually take bean temperatures. So the beans that are in this, there is no thermocouples. There is nothing in here that is recording the bean's temperature. Now, unlike the allele bullet that I have, they actually use infrared, an infrared scanner. That could be something that the Behmor tries to implement in later models, but in the model that I have, there's no way to get the bean temperature. So what you can't do on this machine is get how the bean temperature, the actual bean temperature, is rising over time. This makes it difficult to do what is called roast profiling because in a roast profile, you actually track how much heat the bean is taking on over a course of time. So if you've heard that term roast profiling, what it's doing is it's keeping track of how much heat energy the bean is absorbing, and then it allows roasters to manipulate how much heat they give when they give it that heat. That helps them, depict, times. So if a roaster says, "I want to roast this coffee in 8 minutes," they're going to want to, put a certain amount of heat at early on, and then slowly walk that heat down so the roast doesn't finish too fast, but also so the roast doesn't finish too slow. With the Behmor, because you have these two little heating elements and you can't keep track of what's going on with the bean's temperature, you're kind of just flying blind. Now, just because you're flying blind doesn't mean you can't have good results. But in order to say, hey, you make a perfect batch and then guarantee you can make that exact same batch or close to that exact same batch, it's going to be really, really hard. Now, have I been able to make a good batch, turn around and make another good batch? Absolutely. Because even though I don't have the variables that I want, there are variables present, and I can keep track of those variables. Now, those variables aren't going to be incredibly reliable, but they're something. So what I have journaled here is all the variables that are given to me. The first variable that you can track is time. Time's a very easy variable to track. In fact, this machine has a timer right here, and we'll see that here in a minute. Another variable, like I said, I can track the internal temperature of the roaster. Now, that doesn't tell me how hot the beans are getting, but it does tell me how the internal temperature is changing. And if the internal temperature changed for for the first time you did a coffee, and you try to mimic that internal temperature change the second time, you probably can line up some new results. The last one is the exit temperature. And the exit temperature doesn't actually tell us how much the beans are, but it tells us how hot the air is that's leaving the machine. So if the air that's leaving the machine is getting hotter and hotter, you can assume that the beans are also getting hotter and hotter. If the air that's leaving the machine is starting to level off and it's not getting hotter, well, then you know that the beans are quite possibly or not getting hotter. This is going to make it's going to be really important towards the latter parts of the roasting when we try to, start adding, going to medium and dark roast to make sure that the beans aren't rapidly getting hotter, but also that they're not getting colder. That, while we're putting the roast development on, we're staying at a steady, consistent temperature. Okay, so that is some of the internal works of the Behmor. Some of the other things that to draw your attention to, there is a lot of buttons, and the first thing that kind of just freaked me out when I started with just all these buttons. Anytime you start something new, buttons can be the bane of your existence because if to the untrained eye, this looks like a million buttons, and they're different colors. And full disclosure, some of these buttons actually do two things, meaning when it's in a certain interface, it does one thing, but when it's doing something else, the buttons then transform and do something completely different. That's not great, but the buttons are actually pretty limited. You have 3 designated settings: fourth pound, half pound, and 1 pound. The only thing these do is these determine how much time is going to be. So if you were going to just come into a Behmor, like let's say I called up somebody who's never roasted before, and I told them, roast me a fourth a pound of coffee. The Behmor allows for what they consider to be the adequate amount of time to roast a fourth a pound of coffee. So in this case, 8 minutes and 30 seconds. So if you push that, that's how much initial time you're going to get. Now you're going to be able to add time, down the road. But initially, it gives you 8 minutes and 30 seconds. That's what the good folks at Behmor think that should be what it takes to roast a fourth a pound of coffee on this machine. A half a pound is set at 12 minutes, and 1 pound is set at 18 minutes. So these are preset times. The machine doesn't know how much coffee is in it. There's no weight. So could you put a fourth a pound of coffee in here and push 1 minute? You sure can. And in fact, what a lot of roasters do on this machine is just that. They will push one because they want to get as much time as possible. Because when you start getting really good at roasting on the Behmor, you're going to find that the last thing you want to do is some sort of safety switch or safety element jumping in and messing up your roast. And that's the biggest complaint I've heard about Behmors, is that there's too many safety triggers. Because this is meant to be used in a kitchen, it has 2 heating elements and a very small amount of temperature judging. The possibility that this thing could ignite into a fireball of flame, it's there. So what they try to do to prevent you from lighting your kitchen on fire is only giving you a finite number of time. And then once you've run out of time, that's it. A lot of people that roast on the Behmor find that they just don't have enough time to get to the roast levels they want, especially if they're trying to do a lot of coffee really dark. That brings me up to my next point. The Behmor says that it can roast up to a pound, and I've done a pound of coffee in the Behmor, light roast. Where the Behmor starts running into trouble is getting a full pound of coffee to roast even within 18 minutes. Dark is a stretch. It is really tough to go dark with a big amount of coffee. Most of the roasts that I was doing on the Behmor, I found the sweet spot to be this half pound range. I primarily would only roast a half a pound. Now that was a half a pound green, So I was getting maybe 6 ounces tops each time I'd fire up this machine, which isn't a big deal, but my wife and I are pretty big coffee drinkers, and I was finding myself having to come down here and roast probably 2, 3 times a week, which again, I love roasting coffee, so it wasn't a big deal because I could roast some Ethiopian one day, a Peruvian the next day. It's kind of nice to be able to bounce around. Where I got into trouble is that other people liked my coffee, and then they wanted you get up and your friend, your Aunt Karen would call you up and say, "Hey, I want a pound of coffee," and I'd be a little bit remiss to be able to meet that order because I would have to do a half a pound and I would turn around and do another half a pound because that's where I was most comfortable. I just didn't like it, just isn't built to really be able to do a pound of coffee in any reasonable time frame. It's not that's not a strength. Its strength is a half a pound. So if you're on a Behmor and you're like, I'm not getting great results, try going to a half a pound. And that's kind of the sweet spot of this machine. Just that's what the machine can do. Don't try to make the machine do more than it can do. I mean, that's the number one tip I have as far as a roasting is don't try to make it do more than it can. Let it do what it does and find the sweet spot and have it do that. If you like dark coffee, you are probably going to have to do less. If you like light coffee, you probably can get away with doing more because in the end of the day, you're trying to get as much heat into those beans as you possibly can. So on a Behmor, dark coffee tends to be the biggest issue. Also, dark coffee is kind of the bane of the Behmor because it gets really oily. And as you'll see, these sidewalls, there's not a lot you can do because the drum is actually inside the machine and the rest of the machine is kind of it's it's all the chaos and all the oil and all the smoke is everything inside the machine is kind of exposed to that. Because of that reason, it a dark roast can really build up the machine. You'll find yourself having to clean it out a lot. Unlike, say, a drum roaster where everything is contained inside the drum, not a big deal. In fact, that seasons it, makes it better. So, all right. Last couple of things. There is some time increments. You can bounce up some time increments, but you are limited to how many increments you can push. These are power settings and also predetermined settings. So each one of these is what is called a roast profile. I'm not going to go over those with you. Maybe if I get a lot of requests to say, hey, I want you to go through the roast profiling on the Behmor, I can do that. But there are preset factories where they actually profile out the beans for each item. This allows you to kind of say, taste different flavors. Then would you say the Behmor is better for medium light roast? I would absolutely say that. So if you are using the Behmor, I found I got the best results with medium and light roasts. There are people who use dark roasts on the Behmor, but they use a lot of tricks in order to really get a good time on the dark roast. Isaac, another problem that you run into with the dark roasts on the Behmor is that it starts getting the time stretched way out. And that's when you start getting the conversation of does the coffee taste baked? Now, what baked coffee is and the baked coffee flavor, that's a huge argument that I've read tons and tons of things about. But really, this machine does best in the light and medium roasts because the times in which you're able to manipulate are a lot more feasible. In fact, this thing, full disclosure, with half a pound of coffee, light roast Ethiopians, some of the best Ethiopian coffee I've ever had has been on this machine. Just because there's not like I don't overthink it. I have a very cut and dry system that I try to adhere to, and I get really good results on light roast Ethiopians. Whereas on my bigger machine, I have all the heat all the time to do dark roast, medium light roast. I start profiling it, It's just I've gotten great results on this for light Ethiopians. So good question. Um, Furthermore, these are also the power settings. So P1 being zero power, and there's different percentages. So when you get in, once you push start, this will actually manipulate the power. So you can, have more power, have less power as you go along. What you're going to see when I roast my coffee is I usually just give myself as much time as I possibly can. In fact, I'll push 1 pound D, give myself 23 minutes, and then I will immediately push P5, which will give me full power, and I will ride full power for the early part of the roast, all the way through drying and through most pre-development. I'm doing P5 on this. So let's roast the coffee. I mean, we've talked about it enough. Let's roast. So I preheat. I like to get the metal hot. It's kind of more of a mental thing. There are people who say don't preheat. There are people who say do preheat. I preheat the machine. I don't go past 200 degrees because what happens with the Behmor, and you'll hear me say this a lot, is there is safety switches inside of it. So what takes place in the Behmor is after it gets about 200, 220 degrees, it then will not let you shut the machine off and turn it right back on and start roasting. It wants to go through a cool down. So it wants to be brought down, to room temperature before it lets you roast again. So I don't preheat more than 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is super low. If you are roasting on any other machine, you're probably sitting there, you're thinking to yourself like, what does that do to anything? All it does is it speeds it up just a little bit. One more note for the Behmor. If you don't have your Behmor on an independent power surge, I would highly recommend that. Meaning, plug it into something that's not being used by anything else. The reason for that is because it's an electric machine and because the Behmor doesn't have a ton of power, I have seen more often than not roast times get dropped, increased by a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes by different power sources going on around the house. Also, it doesn't run much more than 1500. However, you can blow circuits, especially like 15 amp circuits. You can easily blow the circuit if something else is on it. And it's a real bummer to be halfway through a roast, have the circuit blow, and then have your coffee just ruined. So get it on as much of an independent circuit as you possibly can. All right, so moving on. Oh, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start the machine. You push P5. You'll notice here it's blinking. So if it is solid, that is the roast profile. If it is, blinking, that means power settings. So P1, that's no power. P2, about 25. P3, about 50% power. P4, about 70 to 80% power. P5, full power. And you'll notice, you'll hear on the machine, you'll hear clicking. So you'll actually hear the machine turning off and on as the power goes off and on. Initially, what I want to do is just get the power setting full bore. So I don't want it clicking off at all. I want to be throwing as much heat at the beans as I possibly can. A is going to tell you the internal temperature. B will tell you the exhaust temperature. So how hot, told you, it's been a couple of weeks. B is the internal, A is the external. Only after you push start. So these are the two variables that you get. Another variable you can kind of play around with is the drum speed. There are two drum speeds on the 2000 AB. There is, I think it's like 8 RPM, or I don't know what it is. To be honest with you, it's more than 8 RPM. I know that. It's this and then fast. initially when I'm roasting the coffee, I like to set my drum speed to fast, and then as I get closer to development, I like to walk off my drum speed a little bit. So um, that's it. We're at 134 degrees. Like I said, we're going to preheat it to 200 degrees, and then we'll drop our coffee in. I have a Papua New Guinea coffee. I want to roast this to medium. So even though I said it does great uh, light roasts, I'm going to go to probably a City Plus. I will give you an idea of how I'm planning on getting there. I can't actually know what the beans temperatures are, nor can I pull beans out. But you can still get there if you adhere to some roasting techniques. I'm just going to take a look. I got about 288 grams, so a little bit more than a half pound. It's really, this is the leftovers that I've had from a really big batch. I like to get the Behmor out when I have small amounts of coffee, anything less than a half a pound. So that is there. All right, 186 degrees Fahrenheit. That is, again, the internal temperature. You'll notice that the exhaust temperature isn't very high. There's no exhaust going on in the early phase. The nice thing about early on in the roast, there's no exit fan. Once the roast hits 7 minutes and 30 seconds, the exit fan will kick on. And, well, if you're at 1 pound, again, if you have any questions about that, drop some things in the comment, and I will. We can always go back and do really specific videos if you're watching this and saying, tell me more about the exit fan. But for now, our exit fan is going to kick on at 7 minutes and 30 seconds. That is going to start increasing the exit temperature, but it's also going to cool down our roast a little bit. If I remember, I'll talk about it when it gets there. All right, blew way past. So I may have already shot myself in the foot because I was talking and I got way hotter than 200 degrees. Hopefully I stayed underneath its threshold. All right. Sometimes I will take the drum out. Sometimes I'll leave the drum in. This time I left the drum in, so it's hot. I got these barbecue pit mitts with the Behmor. If you don't have some sort of thermal glove, you should get some, especially if you want to start really getting this thing performing at its peak capacity. Because you're going to notice I do a lot of what the Behmor company would not be happy about, but it's what I do to get the best results from the Behmor. Which I am not a spokesman by any means for the Behmor company, so I'm going to do stuff a little bit dirty. All right. So we're going to put as much time as we possibly can. So I pushed 1 P5. That's going to give me 23 minutes. That's just as much time as I possibly need. Now, I don't think I'm going to need 23 minutes to pull this roast off, but it's nice to have a little bit of time. And then start the roast. Excellent. And it's about 210 degrees in there right now, so let's see if I can give you guys a little look at the bean shot. Now, I'm going to go P5, and I'm going to push drum, meaning I have it at full power, and I have the drum going as quickly as it is designed to do. I will also be a little shot there. That's what I can see. The window's kind of nice. Some people will put reflective foil over the window to try to even get more heat, more maintained heat. I've never really got into all that. I like the window because you can kind of see the development a little bit going on. So there you go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keep notes Initially, I'm going to keep a note every minute of the internal temperature. So I just want a good idea of how much the temperature is rising every minute. Ideally, it's going to rise about 16 degrees Fahrenheit every minute in order to kind of stay on the track that I want. I love that it's like the size of a toaster oven. Seems like a great beginning. It is, Isaac. In fact, this is the first machine that I really consider that I started really roasting and understanding coffee on. I got this one for $400. I mean, for what something that looks like a toaster oven, it's kind of expensive. I started roasting in my kitchen. I put it right underneath my exhaust for my stove. So the stove was nice because it's, and it's surface that I don't mind having a bunch of heat on. I would turn the exhaust on, and that's where I roasted probably my first 50 batches. I built this little studio when I started doing more like Twitch videos and YouTube videos. It does have an exhaust fan that goes out, which is nice because if you do jump into the medium or dark roasts, it does get a little smoky, but it's a great beginner machine. And in fact, if you're just making coffee for yourself or your family, it's all you really need because you can get spectacular coffee out of this, especially once you roasted a bunch on it. You've kind of figured out the ins and outs of it. If I didn't have, people that started ordering coffee from me and saying like, "Hey, I love your coffee. Can I get some?" I would still be roasting on this machine. All right, so we are 3 minutes into the roast, and we are at internal temperature of 248 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just looking at a Sumatran I've done. I did way back when. We are about within 4 degrees of that, which is pretty good. That means that this coffee is taking heat very similarly. Just looking at other batches, more dense coffees like Ethiopians, they were at like 245. So we're right on track there. I'll go ahead and just write down what we got. Did it make a lot of smoke? Like, could I put it on the stove in my apartment? You can. It doesn't make it does have some smoke suppression. And in fact, if you never open the door, the smoke suppression works pretty good. If you do a light roast, meaning after first crack, if you pull it within about the first minute, the smoke is pretty minimal. In fact, I have this setup, but it used to just be an exhaust fan and it worked just fine. If you turn the stove exhaust on, it won't be any more obnoxious than maybe if you get popcorn a little burnt. I'm not saying it's going to make your house smell like burnt popcorn, but just get a little careless with popcorn. It's about as bad as it gets. And I'll leave this off so that you can kind of see. I'll describe if it's getting smoky or not. All right, so 276 after 4.5 minutes. Let's see, 4.5 minutes. 270. So after, move my book here, get that. So at 284 at 5 minutes. So the last roast that I did, again, the Sumatran, I'm just comparing this with the Sumatran because that's about the similar darkness that I'm going to want. And Sumatra and Papua New Guinea they're close geographically. It's at 290, so perfect. I mean, we're rolling right along here. Again, that's not how hot the beans are. The beans are not that hot, but they are, it does give us something to go off of. So at this point, I'm starting to notice a little bit of scents. It's starting to smell kind of like cut grass and hay. The development phase should be ending pretty shortly here. And you'll notice the beans have taken on kind of a little bit pea green and yellow color. So in roasting, we call this pre-development. when the sugars, when the carbohydrates start breaking down into more simple sugars. That should be taking place here relatively quickly. So that's good. Coffee's getting dried out. Internal temperature of the machine is doing well. So I don't want to throw any like confusion. I don't mean for this video to be like getting too specific, even though I'm 43 minutes into talking about a Behmor, so I'm already pretty specific. That's all right. I'll go back and edit it if I need to. But the another safety feature that's in the Behmor is if it gets up to 320 degrees um, Fahrenheit in the machine, it will automatically kick off the power. Until we reach first crack with this machine, we just want to keep full power. This machine doesn't have enough power to really start getting, to be able to walk anything out. We got to get the first crack as soon as we possibly can. So we just want to make sure that this number doesn't jump above 320 degrees. I feel like I'm making it sound like it's way more complicated than it is. Notice I have not pushed any buttons. I pushed the initial 2 buttons and have just been checking temperatures. That also means this is not a machine that is meant to be left alone. And I'll show you why here in a minute. It is going to get to the point where if you don't touch buttons for a certain period of time, it'll just turn off. So it is not a machine meant to be like you don't just push the buttons, walk away, come back, and have perfect coffee. It is not the case. All right, so 8 minutes in, coffee's looking good. The exhaust fan, you'll notice that has come on. So we're getting some exhaust fan readings now. In fact, now I'm going to start keeping track. I want to see this, make sure the exhaust fan is continuing to go up at a pretty good clip. So it's good. Keep track of that, make sure everything's good. So how long have I been roasting coffee? I've been roasting coffee for about 2 years. I started on a popcorn popper. So I started on this machine, just doing it really sparsely. I bought this, it's probably been about a year since I got the Behmor. I roasted almost every night on the Behmor until March, and then that's when I jumped up to an Allele Bullet. So I've been roasting semi-commercially for a little over a year now. Really been doing a lot of reading and education on it. Pretty heavy for, again, the last year. So been interested in roasting coffee for about 2 years and really roasting coffee for about the last year. And been doing coffee commercially, meaning I have a website where my coffee is and I can roast now enough that I kind of can share batches. I've been doing that since March. All right, so we're about 10 minutes in, and we should be reaching first crack here really any time. And you can notice the coffee is now taking on a rich brown color, and you should be able to hear some of the first crack pops on this. So there's the first couple of cracks. All right. So those are the first. I usually like to let a couple of pops kind of come in, start popping around. Then what I'm going to do is actually push P3. I'm going to cut the power down to half, and I'm going to slow the drum down. So now that I've reached first crack, and I'll let you listen. Nice thing about the Behmor is you really can hear the cracking. So. And I also push C, and that just means that we've hit first crack. So I want this to be a medium roast. I'm probably going to let this develop for about between a minute and a half and 2 minutes, meaning it's now technically roasted coffee, but I'm going to continue to let heat kind of generate on top of the coffee, at this case 50% heat, for about 2 minutes. I'm also going to keep an eye on this, the external temperature, to make sure that this temperature doesn't start to nosedive at all. So at this point, like, I have not turned my exhaust on. I have just noticed it does. I mean, it smells a little smoky in here. I'm looking around. It's not getting like too hazy, but once you've reached, the first crack, there's going to be starting to be some smoke generated on here. So I pushed the button that started a countdown timer of 3 minutes. Behmor thinks that after first crack, it takes about 3 minutes to get to second crack. We're not going to go that far. In fact, we're probably going to pull this about another 20 seconds to get the medium dark that we're looking for. All right. Now, once you're done roasting, you can push cool, and it's going to start a 13-minute cool down cycle. It's going to blast fan. There will be no, I'm going to turn this on because I am in my basement, so I did turn the exhaust on, but it's not smoky at all. So push cool, and this is just going to start blowing as much fan as it possibly can on top of this. Now, you could leave this in here and let it cool down for 13 minutes, and it will actually bring the coffee to room temperature. We're not going to do that. We are actually going to pull this coffee out and externally cool it. All the books that I've ever read said that coffee should be cooled down to room temperature within about 4 minutes, because if you let it sit in the hot drum, it's going to continue to develop. I got it to where I want it, so I want it to now, I don't want it to roast anymore. So in order to manipulate that, I am going to pull the coffee out. I did let it sit in there for a minute, as I don't want to pull it out too soon because I want the chaff to kind of settle. All right, so now we turn the machine off. You kind of got to be quick about this because this machine is hot and it will fry the circuitry. So we turn that off. Now we have the coffee. I'm going to go and I will show you the unit, but I'm going to go and cool this off real quick. You don't hear anything because I turned the mic off. That noise that you're hearing is a shop vac. What I've kind of invented, well, I didn't invent. What I built was a colander in a box. I have the shop vac sucking cool air over top of it, and this is designed to try to get the coffee to cool down within about 4 minutes. It's an external cooling method that I've used. I've seen people use sheet pans. I've seen people use water, where they like have 2 bowls in cold water and they like pour the coffee in the bowls, not in the water, but in the bowls. I've seen people use box fans, a lot of techniques. One thing I did notice is when I stopped letting it cool inside the Behmor, I started getting a lot of success, a lot more flavors, a lot better flavor out of the coffee. Any books for a beginner? Well, that's kind of tough because for a beginner coffee roaster, like everywhere you're going to read, they're going to say Scott Rowe. Scott Rowe is kind of the real godfather of, yeah, and I'll show you exactly what I did here in a second. Scott Rowe is really, he kind of writes out development, brings a very scientific approach, a very, follow these steps, you'll get good coffee approach. So a lot of people will look at Scott Rowe's Roaster Companion. It is about $40 and it's kind of expensive. If you go to a place called Mill City Coffee Roasters and you look up their videos, you go to Mill City Coffee Roasting course, they're free courses on YouTube. Those two gentlemen that do that, that's a really, really good introduction to what coffee roasting is. They give you enough of the science and an understanding of what's going on where. I watched those videos a couple of times. Those are some really, really powerful videos. Robert Haas, Hoos, and it looks like who's. He has a small little pamphlet. It's really good. I think he sells it on his website for like $15. That is really enjoyable. Those three and really YouTube are some great resources when you're getting started. I would say if you want to get a real, like some people are just Scott Rowe through and through, disciples, everything he says they do. They get really good results. Scott Rowe. I follow a group on YouTube. He's starting to do some videos. His name is the Virtual Coffee Lab. He does a video every week, and he's just got some simple 20-minute videos. I'd recommend him as well. Also, I do all of my roasts on Twitch, Fat Beans Coffee Lab. I'm starting to add more to YouTube, so you'll probably see more of these as I go along. And I'm not by any means a professional, but I've made a lot of mistakes. Yeah. So, yeah, this is a diaper box. It's got a hole where I put the shop vac in it. It's got a colander on top, and then there's a hole. So what essentially happens is you put the colander in, cool air is being pulled over top of the coffee, and it's just a real simple way to cool the coffee down in a relatively short amount of time. So that is one hack with the Behmor that I think has probably made one of the bigger differences. So that's the medium, the city plus almost full city that we're looking for. And the roast turned out beautiful. We got a nice puff, which isn't always the case with the Behmor. We got some nice expansion. The overall symmetry of the color is really good. All the beans seem to be roasted at the same degree. No roast defects, which you hardly get any roast defects at all on a Behmor. It just doesn't have enough power to tip it or scold it. Just by biting it, it's a good medium roast. It's still a little bit elastic. It's not like a dark roast that would just shatter. It's got a little bit of elasticity in the bite, and the roasting on the outside and on the inside seem to be pretty consistent. So we got exactly the roast that we were shooting for in a relatively feasible amount of time. This roast, I think it took us about 13 minutes, which on a Behmor, it's pretty good. We hit first crack right around 10 and a half minutes. I've found anywhere between any first crack between 6 and 12 minutes is perfect. So for being a primitive device, and again, just to give you an idea, my first machine, this one was $400. The 1 kilogram machine that I use now is was about $2,800. So that being the kind of the price range jump, this is an excellent thing. If you are even considering roasting coffee, but you don't want to like do a popcorn popper or try to do it over the stove, or and you just want something that's going to work and that you're not going to have to do you're not going to really have to train every day like a samurai to get good at, the Behmor is all you need. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I could make competition grade coffee on the Behmor as long as I didn't need a lot of it. If someone said, "Hey, I need you need a half a pound to compete," I would say, "Let's do it. I'll put it on my Behmor." I'd put like a light roasted Kenyan or Ethiopian in there. I've done so many of them that it's kind of like I just know how to do it, and I know how to get really good results from it. So there is no chaff removing, so there's a lot of chaff left in here. That's just the little paper-like substance that comes off the coffee beans. So I like to just put it in here and just shake it off. And I got a pretty pedestrian basement floor here, so I just let it fall on the floor. I'll shop back it here in a minute. That gets it nice and clean. Makes it a lot more presentable when I put this through my coffee maker. I'm gonna let this degas for a couple days and give it a try, but it looks like good coffee, so tastes like good coffee. So where do I get my green coffee from? Good question. I started getting my coffee from Sweet Maria's. You can buy it by a 1 pound bag. The shipping is probably the biggest issue with Sweet Maria's. They don't really, they know what they are. So I would recommend if you do order from them, try to get at least a month or two supply so you're not getting killed by shipping. But Sweet Maria's is a really, really good place to start because you can buy 1 pound. The stuff that Sweet Maria's gets is arguably probably the top 1% coffee on the planet. They get some astounding coffee. If you are new to coffee roasting and you're really new to trying like different flavors of specialty coffee, I would recommend getting what they have is a 4 or an 8 pound grab bag where they just will send you 8 different coffees. I did that like 4 times, and by then I had roasted so many countries, so many processes, so much different flavor. That's really where my education really came full circle. Is I just sat here on this little machine and just roasted a bunch of different types of coffee. Sweet Maria's, some people say they're a little pricey, but from what I've seen around the other greens, Sweet Maria's, they can't be beat. The quality of the bean, there's so fewer defects in their coffee. The flavors are astounding. They give a lot of roasting notes. Sweet Maria's is also a really great place if you're a new or a home coffee roaster. They got everything. So if you're looking to start Sweet Maria's, if you get a little bit bigger into it, I would recommend Happy Mug. They've got some really unique greens. They keep a good supply. They also sell roasted coffee really cheap. I like to buy some of their blends and like kind of compare my coffee to their coffee. So Happy Mug. Those are probably the two I would recommend sight unseen. If you went to Royal Crown, I believe, Royal Crown Coffee, they sell 20-pound boxes called Crown Jewels, and it's amazing coffee. So it's a little pricey, but that's where I get my greens. Sweet Maria's. In fact, if you're getting into home roasting, go to Sweet Maria's right now. Yes, I would say leave me and just kind of poke around the website. It's super low-key website. it is just, it's the most friendly place for a new home roaster to go. So sweetmarias.com. I can't speak highly enough about them. They are an excellent resource. And I tried some other places that were cheaper, that, you know, had a little bit quicker shipping. I came back to Sweet Maria's every time. And even if that means that my bottom line gets affected by Sweet Maria's being a little bit more expensive, I don't care, because it's the best coffee out there. So, Sweet Maria's. So, here it is. You know, for not having roasted on this in months, that went pretty well. In fact, this is kind of a brag, I guess. I've roasted enough coffee to know that is a superb medium coffee. The Behmor, if you're on the fence, go for it. It's a great machine. Now, if your goal is to become a master coffee roaster, the Behmor does have its limitations, size being one of them. Not a lot of variables. There are better machines out there for tracking variables. But if you just want to start roasting coffee and get really, really good on this machine, you can do that. I always make the analogy with the Behmor is, could you make an amazing meal in a microwave? Given enough time and practice, yes, you could make an astounding meal in a microwave. Could a master chef use a microwave sight unseen and make an amazing meal? Probably. Could you become an amazing chef only using a microwave? No, you just can't. You got to get more experience. But that is my recommendation of the Behmor, is that it is enough that you can make outstanding coffee on this machine if you give it enough, practice. You figure out the quirks, you figure out how you like to run it. So that's why my brother asked me, "Can I have your Behmor?" And I said no, because I'm still going to use it. Because when I get down to small batches, it's fun to break it out and to roast on it again. All right, well, that's a long YouTube video, but it's kind of a quick peek about what I do as far as my roasting content. I really enjoy. Thank you for coming in, Isaac, and asking some really good questions. Those are the kind of questions that get me thinking, and really are beneficial to me. And it's also fun to kind of come in here and hang out, talk coffee, really anything else. I will be doing some brewing. I'm doing some cold brew. I'll kind of explain what I do my cold brew for on Thursday at 8:30. I'll do that on Twitch, just because I started on Twitch, and I think a lot of people that follow me a lot kind of find me on Twitch. But I have been moving. I think I'm going to start moving some more roasts over to YouTube, because it seems like the other home roasters, or really people that are interested in roasting, tend to be here more than on Twitch. So you got to quit talking, otherwise I'm going to spend $400 tonight. All right, I'll stop right there. Yeah, but there's worse places to spend $400, man. And if you do get one, just hit me up in the comments or let me know, and I will. I'll come in here. We can roast. If you got any questions or problems, I'll roast right along with you. And that's kind of the cool thing about this live media. I really enjoy doing it. So thank you for sharing all this. Hey, yeah, absolutely. That's what makes home roasting so cool, is that it's really people that are trying to get a good caffeine high, and they tend to be a very sharing community. So this is kind of my way of adding to that zeitgeist. Thanks for jumping in. I'm gonna take my rest, enjoy some delicious coffee, and I'll see you next time.